anytime any reporters or any investigators have gotten a hold of any little piece of his financial history, it has turned out to be so unimaginably bad. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe this isn't all anybody works on when it comes to him. I mean, any little money thing related to him that has been fully reported reveals a catastrophe. I mean, just pick one at random, right? The presidential campaign, hush money payments that were made to benefit his campaign during the time he was running for president. Funds paid by checks handwritten by Trump Organization executives, including his eldest son. Right? We still don't totally understand why those Trump Organization executives never got charged in this scheme. The president's personal lawyer who conveyed the checks to the women who were being paid off in the scheme, he ended up going to prison for this money. But Michael Cohen is still in prison for that hush money scandal. Prosecutors in the Southern District of New York named the president as the person who supervised and ordered the commission of those felonies. They described him as individual one. Who knows, depending on the statute of limitations and whether he wins re-election, maybe we'll soon see him face his own felony charges on that as well. I mean, that's just a couple $100,000 during the campaign. Let's take a look at that. Whoa, people are going to prison. And maybe the president is too. I mean, what do we know of the president's taxes? Nobody's ever been able to obtain more than a few pages of his taxes. But the New York Times combined those few known pages of his taxes with a bunch of business records from the Trump family businesses that they obtained through sort of mysterious means, and a bunch of Trump's father's taxes. With those materials, the New York Times was able to put together a magnum opus, 40-page long, 13,000-word Pulitzer Prize-winning expose about the president and his siblings running a small despotic country's worth of criminal schemes to evade taxes, to rip off everyone from the city to the federal government to their own tenants, I mean, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. It was such a bad expose. It was bad enough that the president's sister resigned her lifetime seat on the federal judiciary to avoid an ethics inquiry into what she and her brother had done to evade taxes as part of this big family scheme. I mean, judges have lifetime tenure. And, I learned today, an association where they have emergency meetings. But she gave up her seat as a federal judge. She gave up lifetime tenure on the federal bench just to evade a judicial ethics inquiry into her role in that alleged illegal tax scheme that she did with her brother, which he, of course, pays no penalty for because he's president now. What else? I mean, the president had a business venture, which he called a university, Trump University. That was exposed in a tidal wave of civil lawsuits as a massive financial fraud. That was the case, you might remember, in which the president derided the judge overseeing that matter as being incapable of judging his case because the judge was of Mexican ethnic extraction. His parents were from Mexico. And so, therefore, of course, he could not be a judge of a Trump-related matter. Really? Desperate much? The Trump University scam really does appear to have been a long-running, straight-up, big criminal fraud scheme. The president ultimately decided to settle those cases by paying $25 million in cash to the victims of the Trump University scheme. Also, he ran a charity. When the president started promising charitable gifts to veterans organizations during the campaign, remember, he boycotted a debate and said instead he'd hold a fundraiser for veterans, he'd give $1 million of his own money, and wouldn't the veterans be so happy to get these big donations? A Washington Post reporter was assigned to figure out why it seemed like the veterans groups were not actually getting these donations after all, and what happened to Trump's supposed personal $1 million pledge. That appears to have never materialized. Ultimately, the reporter from the Washington Post, trying to follow that one single financial thread with Trump, he ultimately stumbled upon another gigantic financial fraud scheme that the president had been operating, this time under the guise of his foundation, his charity, which was then, after tons of public reporting exposed what he had been doing, it was then shut down as a fraud by New York state regulators. And the president will have a very hard time ever being associated with any charitable entity in years to come, should any charity ever want him. I mean, every single financial anything associated with this president that has ever been investigated to the slightest degree or reported on with any vigor has revealed something that deserves a prison sentence, or at least a lot of probation, or at least the entity being shut down by the authorities, or at least multi-million-dollar fines. I mean, even the ones you've forgotten about. This is a young man named Sam Patten. He very narrowly avoided years in federal prison and instead got years of federal probation, thanks to his fulsome cooperation, after he pled guilty to funneling illegal foreign donations into the Trump inaugural committee. But of course, this is the main super PAC supporting President Trump's re-election effort. This super PAC was recently subpoenaed in conjunction with the criminal case against these gentlemen who were recently indicted for making hundreds of thousands of dollars of illegal donations to Republican candidates and causes, including over $300,000 that they illegally donated to that pro-Trump super PAC supporting the president's re-election effort. I mean, literally, is there anything financial associated with Donald Trump that hasn't resulted in an indictment, a settlement, or some sort of massive scandal? I mean, even if you set aside the illegal emolument stuff, right? Him keeping his businesses open and taking payments from foreign governments, which the Constitution explicitly prohibits. Even if you set aside all the self-dealing. Remember when he was going to host the G7 meeting at Doral, so all of the other G7 countries would have to pay him personally for the privilege of attending the G7? I mean, even if you set aside him spending a third of all of the days of his presidency at properties owned by his business, while his company says, oh, no, we're not profiting from that. The Secret Service stays at these properties for free. But it turns out his business has been charging the U.S. government rack rate, full rack rate, for Secret Service rooms. They've been making a mint on it all this time, and they've just been flat out lying about it. Even if you set aside just the petty rank corruption and self-dealing of his time in office, leaving even that aside, anytime anybody has been able to follow any of the money around him, it is a dumpster fire, and someone often goes to jail. And so, yeah, broad-ranging subpoenas for the entire universe of his financial and banking records and all of his tax returns going back years. Yeah, I think he's nervous about that. I believe that would be the proverbial hill he would choose to proverbially die on in terms of what fight he would take to the max. I believe he would do anything to stop that material from coming out.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.